Client assessments are a part of every client's program, at the start and throughout. Assessments help you and the client establish baseline measurements, track client progress, and can provide insight into potential challenges that need to be considered when designing their fitness program. You'll need to administer assessments throughout your client's program in order to track their progress. So since you'll be taking measurements and completing movement assessments frequently, it's important to remain consistent with how you gather that data. Here are a few tips for ensuring consistency and accuracy in your assessments. First, for objective assessments like measuring weight, body fat testing, or circumference measurements, always take these measures at the same time of day. You'll also want to use the same equipment like the scale, calipers, or the measuring tape. For example, if you have a client weigh themselves once a month and report the measurement to you, make sure they use the same scale every time. No two scales will read exactly the same, and no scale is perfect. But using the same scale will track any rate trends and changes more accurately. Also, have them take their weight at the same time each day, like first thing in the morning before they eat breakfast. This matters because the average human's weight can fluctuate between 5 and 8 pounds in a day. We eat, we drink fluids, we exercise, and we use the bathroom. All of these things can impact overall body weight. They'll also want to wear the same thing to weigh in. Typically, weight is taken with the shoes off and minimal clothing. If they're weighing at a public place like the gym, workout attire is recommended. Next, when calculating body fat, get used to taking skin caliper or circumference measurements on one side of the body. There is no science-based proof that one side of the body is better than the other for these measurements, so there is no preference. Many fitness professionals default to taking measurements that match their handedness. It's easy to remember. If you're right-handed, take measurements on the right side of the client's body. No matter what you choose, make sure you're consistent with every client and for every reassessment for accuracy. Simply choose a side of the body to measure and stick with it. Circling back to circumference measurements. Many of these measures need to be taken at the same location each time. The waist is an easier one. Use the belly button as a landmark. At the hips, the circumference is typically taken at the widest part of the hips and glutes with the feet together. But the arms or thighs can be more challenging. Let's start with the bicep measurement. The shape of this muscle and its symmetry will vary by client. Instead of guessing where to measure, find a midpoint to measure every time. This requires you to measure the length of the client's upper arm and find the halfway point. To do this, use the bony landmarks of the lateral epicondyle of the humerus at the elbow and the most superior part of the lateral point of the shoulder where clavicle meets the acromion. Place the end of the measuring tape at one of the points and measure to the other. Identify the halfway point, and this is where you'll take your measurement. To find a consistent location for the thigh measurement, use the bony landmark of the top of the patella or kneecap and the crease of the hip where flexion occurs. You may have to have the client flex their hip to locate the most superior landmark. Place your measuring tape to measure the distance and find the halfway mark. If you prefer, you can measure the thigh closer to the kneecap to avoid the groin area. Use the bony landmark on the top of the patella and measure a consistent distance up, like 5 inches, for example. This will be where you wrap the measuring tape to measure the thigh. The calf can also be measured by finding the midpoint or a specific distance down from the back of the knee. However, for this measure, many trainers use the widest part of the calf as the measuring point, similar to the hips. Just keep in mind that the width of the calf will vary by client. So will the visual landmark. The chest or bust is a measure that uses physical landmark. It's easiest if you stand slightly behind the client and have the client lift both of their arms overhead before placing the measuring tape at the center of their chest or the nipple line, and then relax their arms to their side as you wrap the measuring tape around their back to take the measurement. Now, don't forget about the movement and posture assessments. Stay consistent with what you're observing and recording. Use the kinetic chain checkpoints as a guide. One thing to consider with these assessments is whether or not the client will have shoes on. Some shoes have thick or unstable soles and can impact what you'll observe during a squat assessment, for example. Taking the shoes off can offer better visibility of what is happening at the foot and ankle checkpoint without interference. However, some clients may prefer not to take their shoes off. So this will be based on the individual client and their preference. Always ask them. Either way, make sure you have a note of how the client completed the assessment so it can be repeated in the same way upon reassessment.